Hey, what's up YouTube? This is tcgsam, and in today's video, I'm going to be going over all the cards every competitive player should be aware of coming out of ALIN's Insight. I'll talk about cards that are generically good and can be played in every single deck, as well as cards that support certain strategies that may or may not be meta relevant. So without any further ado, let's hop straight into it. Alright, so starting off with some potentially new generic cards that could be played in every deck. The first one is a new board breaker. This board breaker is interesting because it's essentially something that your opponent can't really do anything about, kind of like Forbidden Droplets, but this one has a pretty heavy cost where you have to banish cards from your hand or extra deck face down. So I think there's going to be very few decks where this is going to be playable in. Of course, most of the time you're going to want to banish cards from your extra deck face down because just paying the cost from your hand is pretty hefty. So I think it might find a place in very specific decks that may be willing to give up maybe 6 or even 12 cards from their extra deck and just win on that turn. So thinking of maybe a deck like Tenpai Dragon could use it, but outside of that, I don't really think this board breaker is going to see too much play because they're just other board breakers with much lower costs. Don't get me wrong, I think the card is something with potential, but right now I don't think there's a deck that will really fit super well into. Next up is Psalms of Kings, essentially the Dominus Searcher. I think this one is interesting because it can't really be played in most of the decks that are currently playing Dominus cards, because most of the time they're going to want to activate monster effects from the hand, graveyard, or banishment. So even though this is a very strong card and it is a really nice hand trap to have, I don't think there are going to be that many decks that actually take advantage of this, aside from maybe like slower control decks that can get away with not using monster effects for like the next turn essentially. So maybe a deck like Labyrinth could use it, but if you think about decks that are currently playing like Impulse, so decks like Maliss, for example, they can't really slot this in to the deck because it would conflict with their main strategy. Finally, Dragon's Mind. This is essentially like an Omni Negate when you control a monster 2500 attack or defense. This could be good in a select few decks. 2500 is definitely a pretty easy stat line to get to. But I think the big question is, like, would you ever choose to play this over something like Judgment or Strike, for example? Because this is a much more conditional Omni Negate. While yes, you do get 2 uses out of it most of the time, I just feel like you'd rather have a safer card like Judgment that's going to be always live. And as a result, for the most part, I don't think this card is going to be playable in most decks unless there's some very specific way to search it. Alright, so getting into the decks that get new support, the first one is Ryzeal. The main card you want to look out for is Star Ryzeal. It's a new extender for the Ryzeal deck that will allow them to consistently get access to their Ryzeal Cross. It definitely helps the deck out a lot after it was hit on the most recent ban list. And Star Ryzeal is probably going to be like maybe a 1 or 2 of in most Ryzeal variants. Just being able to access it throughout your combo to pretty much guarantee you'll get access to your cross even if your duo drive gets negated is going to be pretty huge for the deck. Not to mention the deck was kind of lacking in names too, so having an extra body as well will really help the deck out. Ryzeal Mass Driver I don't think is super good. I don't really feel like either of its effects are very relevant. If you were to play a Ryzeal trap in like the pure Ryzeal deck, I think most players would just play Plasma Hole. And speaking of Plasma Hole, Star Ryzeal also helps you get access to that more consistently. So maybe you can expect Ryzeal decks to end on Plasma Hole plus Cross a little more often. Perhaps the most meta-relevant wave of support is going to be for Maliss, the biggest one being Maliss P March Hare. March Hare is definitely an integral part of a lot of the combo lines now. Not to mention, it's just a very generically good card for the Maliss deck. It essentially acts as a Cyber Spisteel that has the Maliss name, and you can essentially recur it infinitely over and over again. And that'll make it so you have an extender on your turn and a potential way to banish stuff out of your graveyard during your opponent's turn as well, which can be really nice for triggering something like Whitebinder. Maliss in the Mirror is also not a card to be underestimated either. In a lot of the combo lines, you might actually just use Maliss in the Mirror to get an extra search out of your combo. So what I mean by that is, like, when you're going through your regular combo, you'll activate the Field Spell, which will inevitably end up banishing something like Whitebinder, for example. But if you end up banishing Maliss in the Mirror instead, you can use Maliss in the Mirror to banish the Whitebinder, search a Maliss monster for free, and still get the Whitebinder proc. So that can be really good to get like a free March Hare to your hand. I think Maliss in the Mirror is definitely going to be played at maybe at least 1 copy in most Maliss variants. Of course, its on-field effects is also pretty solid. If you already have the Field Spell, you can use Red Ransom to add this from your deck to your hand as an additional interruption, which is also really good. March Hare, I think, is probably going to be a 2 to 3 of in most Maliss decks. It's just an incredibly powerful card for the deck, and definitely helps solve quite a few of the deck's problems. As if Maliss wasn't getting enough good support already, they get even more help with like the Ad Ignister cards. Yes, these cards are designed, I guess, to help the Ad Ignister deck, but these three specifically can be used in Maliss. The first key card they're going to get is Echo Talker at Ignister. This one is essentially a generic Omni Negate for them. They'll be able to bring a few bodies back from the graveyard to help them have free bodies to tribute as an Omni Negate, which is really good. Backup at Ignister is a nice extender for the deck, gives it a little bit extra consistency. And Wizard at Ignister is a very nice extender that they'll probably play one of. So in most Maliss decks, you'll probably see 1 copy of Echo Talker, 3 copies of Backup at Ignister, and 1 copy of Wizard. It's just a very good supplementary extender engine, which makes it so they don't necessarily have to play cards like Kashtira or Sky Striker anymore as free bodies. These new Ignister cards are just better in the sense that they're Cybers monsters, and it allows Maliss to access the Cybers toolbox in the extra deck, which overall is going to make Maliss a very scary tier 1 threat, and in my opinion, it probably is going to be the best deck post Alliance Insight, thanks to this support. Next up, we have Mitsurugi. Mitsurugi does get quite a few new cards in their second wave of support, but I think the most relevant ones are going to be the new Ritual monster, as well as the new level 4 monster. These are the ones you'll probably see in every Mitsurugi deck, as well as Mitsurugi variants. The new Ritual monster gives them a great way to like tutor out a body for free from the deck once per duel, and the new level 4 gives them a way to search a Mitsurugi monster. So it's sort of like the equivalent to Saji. These two will definitely make Mitsurugi as a pure deck viable. I think they have enough support to kind of be their own self-contained deck now, in my opinion. But I think most likely you're going to see these Mitsurugi cards be played with the Ryzeal deck. Yeah, even though the Ryzeal deck did take a decent hit on the previous ban list, Ryzeal as an engine is still consistent enough to help the Mitsurugi deck access cards like King of the Feral Imps that I think it's still going to see a lot of competitive play. So if people aren't playing decks like pure Ryzeal or Fiends with Ryzeal, Mitsurugi Ryzeal is probably going to be the next variant that they pivot to, just because of how powerful the new support is and the existing Mitsurugi support is. So I definitely wouldn't be surprised to see Mitsurugi pop up in this upcoming metagame. White Forest also gets some new support. Here are 2 of the very specific White Forest cards. As far as I know, there is some synergy between like the Diabellstar cards and the White Forest cards, although I don't have them pictured here. There are some new Diabellstar cards in the set as well. But I think most importantly, the White Forest deck does get Witches of the White Forest, which is a nice consistency field spell for them. Almost like an unconditional searcher compared to something like Tails, which required you to essentially control a White Forest monster on the board to be able to activate it. Whereas now with Witches, you get a free search, and that can be really nice for the consistency of the deck. I think overall, these new support cards do help push the deck a little bit in the right direction. I do think the deck's going to be meta relevant. I'd probably say it's just outside like tier 1 in my opinion. It's definitely going to be a competitive deck that you will see in the metagame, although I don't think it's going to be super popular. Next up, we have the Funny Number deck, or Heraldic Beasts. These do get some very good new cards, especially Griffin. Griffin is kind of just like a Heraldic Beast circular in some sense, and we all know how powerful Mathematic Circular is, considering it was on the ban list until recently. I don't really think this deck is going to be super competitive, but I think it could be a solid rogue option. There are locks that sort of prevent you from going into anything other than Heraldic Beasts or numbers, so it's kind of hard to say where people will look to take this deck, but I think it could be an interesting alternative to Ryzeal if you do want to play like a rank 4 deck. But overall, I think it won't be more than just a rogue strategy that's maybe cool to see. Dragon Rulers are also getting new support, and I actually think that some of their cards are pretty solid, especially with how much good generic dragon support that we have in the game now. I'm not too sure how people will choose to play the Dragon Rulers, maybe like in a grass build or just as a pure Dragon Ruler deck, maybe with like chaos cards like Chaos Space. There's so much dragon support that it's definitely possible that these cards will find their way into a competitive deck that could be a threat to the metagame. Some of the Dragon Rulers may seem a bit antiquated and their effects haven't necessarily kept up too well with power creep, but the new Dragon Rulers are definitely something that I would be aware of. Just know that this could be a potential new support for existing dragon combo decks, or it could even be part of a new dragon combo deck that people have still yet to experiment with. So while I do think that Dragon Rulers aren't going to be the best deck of the format, I think it's probably going to be similar to Heraldic Beast in the sense that it is a viable rogue deck that has a lot of potential for experimentation, even more so than Heraldic Beast, because as far as I know, none of these cards really lock you into anything, so you could just play like generic dragon slop, and that could be good enough depending on how the metagame shapes up. We also get the Regenesis card. I don't really think this deck is viable, I guess, as a pure deck, but it would probably be used more so as a engine in very specific decks. So their conditions essentially center around monsters with 2500 attack and 2500 defense. Probably can fit really well into decks that have monsters with that stat line. Off the top of my head, I think Cashier Unicorn has 2500 attack, and maybe you could play these as like free bodies in a deck that plays Cashier Unicorn. But outside of that, I think this is an engine with a ton of potential. Just because the cards are so generic, there aren't really any restrictions on them at all. These could be used either as like Link fodder or Xyz fodder in very specific decks. Although at the moment, I don't think any of the best decks like Maliss or Ryzeal are going to be able to take advantage of it. I do think this is an engine that you should keep on your radar, at least for now, just because of how generic the cards are and how individually strong each of them are. Finally, we have some just generally good miscellaneous cards that you should be aware of. Evil Twin Kiss Kill Deal. This is a very powerful Link 1 for the Evil Twin and Live Twin deck. I think this is actually going to be meta relevant because that deck is all Light Fiends, and Light Fiends synergize incredibly well with the Fiendsmith cards. So I definitely think there's a world where the Fiendsmith Evil Twin deck could take off because there is a decent amount of synergy between the two decks. And not to mention, this Link 1 is incredibly powerful, plus the new main deck monster they get is also pretty good as well. So I think that this could be a solid tier 2 contender, just because of how strong the Fiendsmith engine is and how it can pretty much carry any deck that it's in. Next up is Philia Regis. It's just a generic dragon fusion monster pretty much. I don't think it's gonna see too much play in most decks because most decks aren't playing dragons, but it is just a very generically good dragon fusion monster that specific decks like Dragon Mates can take advantage of. And Dragon Mates, as far as I know, are getting some more support in the future, so I think this could be a very relevant card to keep on your radar. And then finally, Jura, the Cursed Thunder Deity, is a generic synchro monster. Although its level is kind of awkward being level 11, I do think it has a relevant enough effect to be able to compete in the metagame if there is a deck that can take advantage of level 11 synchro monsters. Off the top of my head, the only deck I can really think of is Punks, and I think that deck probably won't be relevant until it gets its new support in the coming future. But that being said though, Philia Regis and Jura are both essentially pseudo-generic enough to where I think you should be aware that these are staple cards do exist and can be played in some very specific decks. So to sum up Alliance Insight's overall meta impact, Maliss and Ryzeal definitely are like the big winners of this set, especially Maliss. Both of these decks get very impactful support that will definitely propel them to like top 1 and top 2 again, in my opinion. Maliss will probably end up being the best deck because it did get quite a bit of great support that helps it play through problem cards like Artifact Lancia. Ryzeal gets some much needed consistency and extension through Star Ryzeal. So I think these decks are going to be back to being on top, at least until we get the next ban list or the next set release. Out of all the decks that I talked about, I think most of them are like decent enough to be like a tier 2 strategy. Perhaps the most relevant one would probably be like White Forest. I think will be the closest to tier 1. Don't get me wrong, the support for all these decks are really nice and are very strong cards, but I just don't think they will be able to overtake Maliss or Ryzeal. They'll definitely still be competitive, but I think Ryzeal and Maliss will just be one step ahead of them in this metagame. And in general, there aren't that many new staple cards you should be aware of. I did talk about like 3 to 5 of them, but most of those are very niche and won't be able to be played in most competitive meta decks. So I do think it's good to be aware that these cards exist because there may be a very specific deck in the future that can take advantage of all of them. But I think for the most part, what you can expect out of this set is just support for existing decks and mainly Maliss and Ryzeal. Before I end off the video, I just want to give a quick shout out to CardTrader and Your Playmat. You can check them out using my links in the description below. If you sign up using my link and use code TCGSAM, you'll not only be getting 5% off your entire order, but you'll also be helping to support the channel, which I greatly appreciate. So that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you did, I just ask that you please subscribe to the channel. It really does help keep me motivated to keep posting more videos like this, and it helps YouTube know that you appreciate the content like this. But with all that being said, I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.